What if the man you loved became your prison? And what if the one who saved you only did it to own you? This isn't just a love story gone wrong. It's a haunting tale of obsession, betrayal, and the slow, silent breaking of a woman who trusted too deeply. Behind every perfect smile is a secret. Behind every rescue, a price. And sometimes the scariest monsters don't raise their voices. They whisper promises. This is my story. I'm Mary, and what you're about to hear, no one ever dared to tell. When I was little, I thought life would always be golden. I grew up in a grand house just outside of Connecticut. Red brick, white columns, the kind of place that felt like it had always existed. My parents adored me. I was their only child, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I was loved. My mom would stroke my hair at night and whisper, "You're my heart outside my body." And my father, he was the kind of man who made the world feel safe just by standing beside you. I never heard yelling. I never saw fear. It was all warmth, comfort, protection. The kind of childhood you don't realize is rare until much, much later. I had ballet classes, weekend getaways to art museums, Sunday brunches on the patio, with fresh squeezed orange juice and linen napkins. It was a beautiful life, and I truly believed the world worked the way my home did. Soft, structured, and full of love. I thought that if you were kind, the world would be kind back. Oberlin changed everything. I arrived with my sweaters neatly folded, my schedule perfectly color-coded, and my heart wide open. The campus felt like something out of a dream. Golden leaves, buzzing conversation, that smell of new beginnings. I wanted to learn. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to fall in love. And then I saw him, John. He was standing near the steps of the student center, surrounded by people who were laughing a little too hard, leaning in a little too close. But he didn't seem to be trying. He wasn't loud or boastful. He was just there, magnetic, effortless. His smile hit me in the chest like a gust of wind. I don't even remember how we ended up talking. One moment I was sipping lukewarm coffee, and the next we were knee-deep in a conversation about post-war literature and how campus dining should be classified as a war crime. I remember thinking, how does someone like this exist? He wasn't just smart. He was clever, charming, kind in that way that made you feel chosen. We were both from the same world. Old families, private schools, polite expectations. But where I was cautious, John was bold. He didn't apologize for wanting more. He had presence, confidence, that quiet kind that doesn't need to prove anything. Being with him made me feel brave, important, special. It didn't take long for everyone to start noticing. We became Mary and John like it was one word. People called us the golden couple. And for a while we were studying in the library until 2 a.m., whispering jokes between rows of books, walking home through snow-covered paths, fingers intertwined, kisses in the dark, secrets shared on rooftops, coffee dates that turned into whole afternoons. I remember the first time he kissed me. It was raining and we'd both forgotten umbrellas. We were laughing about something dumb. I can't even remember what. And then just like that, his hand was on my cheek, and I swear the world went quiet. I felt seen, fully, completely. I started journaling about him, scribbling his name in the margins of my notes, like a teenager in love. I wrote that his voice calmed me, that I trusted him in a way I'd never trusted anyone, that this was what love was supposed to be. And maybe it was. When we both got into the University of Chicago for grad school, it felt like fate. Same field, same future. We sat on a bench by the lake and made the decision together, hands clasped between us like a promise. I remember looking at him and thinking, there's no part of me that doesn't want this. My parents were thrilled. My mother said, he's exactly the kind of man I hoped you'd find. And my father, he shook John's hand and said, take care of her. I didn't know how much that sentence would come back to haunt me. Leaving Oberlin felt like closing the happiest chapter of a book you never wanted to end. I cried the night we packed, not because I doubted us, but because I loved who I was there. With him, with my friends, with the version of me that hadn't yet learned how fragile happiness could be. I told myself this next chapter would be even better. Chicago was cold in a way that crept into your bones. The buildings loomed higher, the people walked faster. But with John beside me, it all felt exciting, like an adventure we were taking together. I'd sit by the window, coffee in hand, and write in my journal about our future. Lectures, careers, maybe one day, a brownstone apartment with shelves full of books and quiet jazz, playing at night. There's a moment I come back to often. We were lying under a tree just off campus. The sun filtered through the leaves and dappled his face in gold. He was telling me some ridiculous story about a professor, and I couldn't stop laughing. I looked over at him, and for the first time in my life I thought, I think I've found the one. And he looked back at me like he already knew. That memory. It's frozen in my mind like a photograph. I can still feel the warmth of that day, still hear the echo of my own laughter. If I close my eyes, I can almost believe nothing ever changed. But it did. It all did. And if I had known then what I know now, I don't know if I would have followed him. But I did, with all the love in my heart, and not an ounce of fear. It started like a dream that just wouldn't end. The first year at Chicago had only made John and me stronger. Or at least, that's what I believed. He made me feel like I was everything. Thoughtful little gifts, sweet notes hidden in my textbooks, weekend getaways, even those perfectly lit photos of us he'd post with captions like, "My person." Everyone thought we were goals, and maybe I thought so too, for a while. But something started to shift, slowly, quietly, not enough to scream about, just enough to whisper. It began with small things, glances that lasted too long, a girl's laugh that felt too familiar. It wasn't anything I could prove, just a feeling. And then came Margaret. I didn't even notice her at first. She was just one of the many faces in our friend circle. Smart, kind, always smiling. But one afternoon I walked into the cafe near campus and saw them together, John and Margaret. He was leaning close, laughing at something she said, his hand brushing her arm like it had every right to be there. It froze me. Just for a second. That tiny sharp sting in my chest. You know the one that says, "You don't belong in this moment." I waited until later to bring it up. I didn't want to seem insecure. I told myself I was just being silly. But when I mentioned it, when I asked, "Hey, you and Margaret seem close?" he turned cold, defensive. His smile faded and he said, "She's just a friend, Mary." God, are we really doing this? Don't start acting like that kind of girlfriend. That kind. I remember sitting there stunned, like he'd just pulled a thread and unraveled something I didn't even know was fragile. He didn't apologize. He didn't even ask how I felt. He made it about my jealousy, my imagination. And just like that, I went from feeling like the love of his life to feeling like a problem he didn't have time for. That was the first crack, and then came Peter. I didn't think much of him at first. John brought him around like a trophy, introducing him to everyone like he'd just discovered the next great thing. Peter wasn't loud or flashy, but people paid attention to him. You could feel it when he walked into a room. The shift, the eyes turning. He had this stillness about him, the kind that didn't demand attention. It just attracted it. He didn't flirt. He didn't try. He just noticed. And that felt strange to me, after months of feeling invisible in my own relationship. At first, it was little things. The way he listened when I spoke. Not just nodded, listened. The way he remembered what I said, even if it was something small. Like how I liked my coffee or that I missed New England autumns. Once during a group dinner, he pulled out the chair beside him for me. Not in a performative way, just as if he'd thought of it before I even reached the table. That shouldn't have stood out, but it did, because I hadn't felt that kind of consideration from John in months. And then, the strangest thing happened. I was on the phone with my dad. Just a casual catch-up call. I mentioned Peter. I think I said something like, "He's John's new best friend. Kind of an interesting guy. You'd probably like him. You remind me of my younger self. Curious and kind. Subscribe so I can tell you the rest of my life before time runs out." There was a pause. Then my father said, "Peter. Peter Langford?" I said, "Yeah." And then he laughed, low and surprised. "Mary, his father, and I are partners. We've worked together for over a decade. You've probably seen him at the holiday parties. You just don't remember." I stood there, silent, the phone pressed to my ear, feeling like the floor had tilted beneath me. Of course he wasn't just some stranger. He was part of my world, my family's world, another invisible string tying me to something I didn't fully understand. After that, I started seeing him differently. Not romantically, not yet, but real, familiar. Like fate had quietly placed him at the edge of my life and waited for me to notice. Meanwhile, John changed, too. But not in the way I hoped. He was still charming in public, still posted about me like I was his world. But behind closed doors, I started to feel like a character he was tired of playing with. He'd listen less, dismiss more. Talk about Peter with admiration I used to hear in his voice when he talked about us. Sometimes I felt like I was standing next to a man who was no longer interested in loving me, only in being admired for having me. Our friend circle expanded, filled with bright, ambitious people who always seemed to be laughing about something I hadn't heard. And somewhere in all that noise, I started to feel quiet, like a photograph on the wall. Part of the scenery, not the story. One night at a party, I watched John across the room. He was surrounded by people, laughing, confident, shining, and I realized he hadn't looked at me once all night. But Peter did, just once. Our eyes met across the room and he gave me a nod. Simple, grounding. And in that tiny gesture I felt more seen than I had in weeks. It didn't mean anything, not then. But it stayed with me, and I began to wonder if the man who claimed to love me the most didn't even see me anymore. What did that say about our love? I still told myself it was just a phase. Maybe I was overthinking. That relationship goes through ups and downs. But the truth? That was the first time I started to question what we were building, whether it was love or just habit, and whether the version of John I had fallen in love with was ever really the man standing in front of me. I was glowing when we told them. John and I had just finished our degrees. We were young, full of plans, and utterly convinced we were on the edge of a perfect life. We sat across from my parents at the dining room table, the same one where I'd celebrated birthdays, Thanksgivings, every important family moment. This time, it was my moment. I looked at them with the same certainty I'd once looked at fairy tales. "We want to get married," I said. John squeezed my hand like it was a confirmation, a promise. My mother gasped softly and smiled, but my father just looked at me. Not at John, just me. He set down his glass, leaned back in his chair, and after a long silence, he said something I will never forget. "You should marry Peter instead." I laughed. I thought he was joking, but he didn't smile, not even a little. "Peter is steady," he said. "Responsible. He's already proven himself. He's more like a family." It felt like the air was sucked out of the room. I remember staring at him, heart pounding. "I love John," I said, like it was the only answer that mattered. "I've always loved him." My father's eyes didn't waver. Not everything that shines is gold. And that's when I broke. I cried. I begged. I reminded them of how long John and I had been together, how he knew me better than anyone, how he made me feel safe. Eventually they agreed, or rather, they surrendered. My mother hugged me with a trembling smile. My father kissed the top of my head, but didn't say much after that. I think something inside him shifted that day. Something quiet and irreversible, like watching a train you know is going to crash, but you're too far away to stop it. The wedding was beautiful. On the surface, everything was perfect. White roses, candlelight, champagne that sparkled like starlight. People cried when we said our vows. I wore my mother's earrings. John looked stunning in his tailored suit. And when he said I do, he smiled just like the boy I had fallen in love with at Oberlin. But that smile didn't last. I noticed it first during the reception. Just a flicker, I was laughing with one of my cousins, and I felt eyes on me. I turned and saw John across the room, not smiling, not talking, just watching. There was something in his expression. Possessive, unreadable, cold, and Peter. He was there too, standing off to the side. He came up to congratulate us, of course. Said all the right things. But he didn't look at John. Not really. He looked at me. His eyes held something I couldn't place. Something I didn't want to look at too closely. Later, when the lights dimmed and the music slowed, I found myself alone for a few minutes. Everyone was dancing, laughing, celebrating. And I sat by myself at the sweetheart table, watching my husband across the floor, surrounded by people. But not with me. That night, after the last guest left, we returned to our suite, and I waited for the tenderness, the laughter, the joy we used to have. But John was quiet, distant. He poured himself a drink and didn't even look at me as he said, "You fought for this. Now you belong to me." I laughed at first, though he was teasing, but he wasn't smiling. I remember the silence stretching so long I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood there, still in my wedding dress, and something inside me cracked, quietly, like ice splitting under pressure. The honeymoon was a blur. We went to the Amalfi Coast. It should have been magic, and in the pictures it looks like magic. Me in sundresses, John with his arm around me, the ocean behind us. But those pictures lie. He was distracted, often on his phone. Short-tempered. He made fun of the way I mispronounced a word in Italian and laughed too hard when I tripped on the cobblestone street. When I asked him if something was wrong, he said, "God, Mary, can you stop needing everything to be perfect?" And that was the first time I didn't respond. I just smiled like it was fine, like I hadn't just been slapped with words. Back home, things got worse. He started questioning what I wore, criticizing my friends, making comments like, "You don't need to go out that much. You have me now." Once I caught him going through my messages. I asked him why. He shrugged. "I'm your husband. I have the right to know what you're hiding." I wasn't hiding anything, except my fear. Peter came around sometimes. Not often. When he did, he was polite, reserved, never stayed long. But I could feel something behind his eyes, something unsaid. Once he stayed late after dinner. John had gone to bed early, and Peter helped me clear the dishes. As I was drying a plate, I looked up and caught him watching me. Just for a second. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even pity, it was knowing, like he saw what was happening, like he knew I was drowning and couldn't throw a rope without pulling John down, too. I wonder sometimes if Peter was ever in love with me. Maybe not in the way stories tell it, but in the quiet, unfinished way. A missed moment, a closed door. My father stopped calling as often. My mother filled the silence with cheerful updates, trying too hard to sound happy. I think they both knew. I think my father was grieving something he couldn't fix. I still wore the ring. It used to sparkle when the light hit it just right. Now it felt like a weight, not heavy enough to crush me, just enough to remind me that I wasn't free. I had loved John with everything I had. I had chosen him, defended him, promised him forever. And now, every time he smiled in public and whispered something cold in private, I had to ask myself, was he always like this? Or did I just refuse to see it until it was too late? I wanted to believe we were healing. After the cold stares and the stinging silences of those first few months, something in John softened. For a while, he started coming home earlier. He made dinner once with candles and music. I remember standing in the kitchen that night, watching him chop herbs, smiling like the boy I fell in love with. And I thought, maybe this can work. Maybe love just takes time to settle. Maybe all marriages have rough beginnings. God, I was so desperate to believe that. Then everything changed. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just gotten off the phone with my dad. I told him I missed him, that we should have dinner soon. He sounded hesitant, even distant. But he asked about John, how we were doing. And for the first time, I lied. "We're fine," I said. Later that evening, John came into the room like a storm cloud. I was curled up reading, and he just stood there watching me. I asked him what was wrong, and he said it. Flat, emotionless, Peter told me. I didn't understand at first. Told him what? That your father wanted you to marry him. That he loved you. That maybe you loved him too. His voice cracked somewhere in the middle, but there was nothing human in his eyes. Only suspicion, fury, and something else. Hurt, yes, but twisted, curdled. I tried to explain. I told him I never knew Peter felt that way. That I didn't love Peter. That I chose him. I chose you, John. He just stared at me. No, you chose what was easy. You chose what made Daddy angry. You didn't love me. You used me to rebel. If my story found a little space in your heart, leave me a comment. Press that like and subscribe, so we can meet again for another memory. I felt like the floor had disappeared. I got up slowly, reaching for him, but he stepped back like I was something filthy. Then, before I could even speak, his hand was across my face. It was so fast. Just a flash of white, heat, pain, and the sound. Louder than I expected. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just touched my lip and felt the blood, and he looked horrified. He fell to his knees like a man who'd killed something, apologizing over and over. I didn't mean to. God, Mary, I snapped. I'm sorry. He held me all night, crying into my hair, and I forgave him. Because that's what you do, right? When someone you love is hurting, you forgive, even if they hurt you back. That was the first time. It wasn't the last. The bruises became harder to hide. Once it was my wrist, another time my ribs, always followed by roses, by promises, by silence. I stopped telling my friends anything real. I stopped picking up my father's calls. I stopped writing in my journal because even paper began to feel like a witness I couldn't afford. And then, Peter came. He showed up unannounced one afternoon. I think he just missed his friend. Or maybe he already suspected. Maybe he just wanted to see. John was in the kitchen. I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard them talking, then yelling, and then footsteps. Fast, loud. When I turned the corner, John grabbed my arm, hard, and said, "Did you invite him? Is this what you wanted?" I didn't even get the chance to answer. He hit me. Not a slap, a punch, and I hit the floor. And there was Peter. Right there. He saw everything. The silence that followed felt like thunder. I saw his face change. His whole body stiffened. And then he lunged, pulled John off me yelling. Something I don't even remember. I just heard my name, over and over. Peter shouted, "Mary, are you okay?" I couldn't answer. I was crying, but no sound came out. John yelled too, his voice breaking, twisted, saying things like, "She made me do it, and she's not innocent." Peter didn't listen. He pulled me to my feet and held me like I was glass. And in that moment, for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt seen. He called my parents. I don't know what he told them, but they arrived an hour later. My mother ran to me sobbing. My father didn't speak. He just looked at me. And I looked back at him with the same shame I'd been carrying like a second skin. And then John. He smiled right in front of them. Calm, cool, charming. "You bring the police," he said. "And she disappears. Forever." I promise you." I think that was the moment I realized I was a hostage, not just in my home. In my life, my parents didn't call the police. Peter tried to convince them. My father wanted to, but the fear was too big, too real. They left that night with tears in their eyes and hands that trembled when they touched mine. And me, I went back into that house. I went back because I didn't know how not to. Because I still remembered the boy from Oberlin. Because I still believed he was in there somewhere, hidden under all that darkness. Because I thought, if I just loved harder, if I just stayed quiet, if I just did everything right, maybe he'd come back. I started sleeping with makeup on. I learned how to smile with a bruised jaw. I learned how to say, "I'm clumsy," like it was a prayer. One night I looked in the mirror, touched the purpling skin beneath my eye, and whispered, "I chose this." And the girl looking back at me didn't look like me at all. It was a Wednesday. I hadn't seen the sky in over 2 weeks. I could only hear it. Through the tiny cracks around the boarded windows, through the echo of rain on the roof, through the hiss of wind that slipped past the heavy curtains he made me keep shut. John had started locking the doors when he left, pocketing both keys. He said it was for my safety. I stopped asking from what. My body had grown thin. My hair was always pulled back but no longer brushed. I wore the same sweatshirt for days, because it covered the bruises best. I didn't recognize myself anymore. Not in the mirror. Not in my own thoughts. Then one morning something changed. I heard the door shut at 8:32 a.m. His footsteps down the hall, the usual jangle of keys, the sound of the lock clicking twice. But this time, it felt lighter. I moved to the window, careful not to shift the curtain. John's car was gone. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. I sat on the floor, heart pounding. At 9:08 I heard it. A whisper of movement. Not the house settling. Not the wind. Someone was there. Then a key in the back door. It creaked open. And there he was. Peter. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just looked at me like I was a ghost he wasn't sure was real. His eyes scanned my body. Then my face, then my eyes. I must have looked like hell. "I have 10 minutes," he whispered. I didn't move. He stepped forward slowly, like you would with a wounded animal. His hand reached for mine. "Mary, it's time." And something inside me cracked open. I didn't even remember standing. I just remember moving, fast, through the hallway, through the kitchen, past the door John had kept locked with such certainty. My lungs felt like they'd been asleep for months. I paused for 1 second at the threshold. I looked back, at the house, the cage. Then I ran. Peter drove like a man being chased by time itself. He didn't speak. Neither did I. I just pressed my forehead to the window and cried silently. When we pulled up to my parents' estate, my mother ran out before the car had fully stopped. She opened the door, saw me, and gasped like she'd been shot. My father froze behind her. I could see the blood drain from his face. No one asked questions. They just held me. I don't know how long I slept that night. Maybe a full day, maybe more. Peter stayed. He stayed through the tears, through the silence, through the doctor's visit, through the lawyers my father called and then dismissed after hearing John's threats. Peter became a fixture in the house, silent, steady, always near. And slowly my parents started to see him differently. "He saved you," my father said one night, gently after dinner, when we couldn't, when we were too afraid. I looked at Peter across the room. He wasn't listening, but somehow he was. A few days later, my father pulled him aside. I overheard. "You've always been like a son to us. If you want this life with her..." He paused. "You have our blessing." Peter didn't say anything right away. Then finally, "I love her. I always have." And so the question came to me. Not with roses or a ring, not with a big speech. Just Peter sitting beside me on the porch one evening, after sunset. "I'd never hurt you. he said. I nodded. I'd protect you. Always. I nodded again. Then, quietly, would you ever consider being with me? Not just for safety, but for real? And I remember saying it so quietly, I wasn't even sure I'd said it aloud. Maybe this is how it was meant to be. The wedding was simple. No grand ballroom, no orchestra. Just a garden, a few close friends, and our families. My mother helped me into a pale gray dress, soft, modest, beautiful in a quiet way. I caught my reflection before we left the room. I looked like someone else's daughter. During the ceremony, Peter's eyes never left mine. His hand found mine and squeezed just a little too tightly. I told myself it was nerves, that he was just emotional, that he was proud. When he kissed me, it was gentle, respectful. But I didn't close my eyes. That night, I sat in the room that had once been mine, now ours, staring out the window as the wind bent the trees gently. Peter came in quietly. He stood behind me and wrapped a shawl around my shoulders. I flinched. He felt it. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "You don't need to be." But I could feel something under his voice. Not anger, not cruelty, just expectation. "You're safe now," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. He kissed my forehead, then left the room to get me tea. And I sat there, wrapped in a stranger's name, wearing a dress that wasn't white, feeling the softness of a new kind of silence. No screaming, no fists, no blood, just stillness. But somewhere inside me a voice whispered, "The cage is prettier now." But it's still locked. It was raining the day they buried my parents. The kind of rain that soaks through your clothes, but never quite reaches your skin. Just cold enough to remind you you're still alive. I stood at the edge of the grave in a black dress I didn't pick. Peter held an umbrella over us both. I didn't cry, not a single tear. There was nothing left inside me to spill. My father's last words to me, the ones that kept replaying in my head, weren't goodbye, or I love you, or be strong. They were, marry Peter, he'll protect you. So I did. Less than 2 weeks later, I stood in front of the same priest who had blessed John and me. Only this time, the church was nearly empty, the air heavy with silence instead of music. I wore gray. Again. My eyes met Peter's. He looked satisfied. Not happy. Satisfied. That night, after everyone had gone home, he poured a glass of wine, handed it to me and said softly, "You've always belonged to me. You just didn't know it." I set the glass down. He didn't like that. He didn't hit me that night. Not yet. But the shift in his face, the glint behind his eyes. I knew the game. I'd played it before. Only this time the rules were different. This time I had no one left on the outside. No father to call. No mother to lie for me. No escape. Peter didn't raise his voice. He didn't lose control. He planned his cruelty. Methodical, patient, sharp as glass. The windowless room was down the hall, past the study. He said it was for discipline. Said I needed correction. Said I didn't appreciate what he had done. What he had sacrificed to win me. "You've listened so kindly. Before you go, promise me one thing, like, comment, and subscribe. So this old lady's stories don't fade away with time." Yes, that's the word he used. Win. "I waited while you slept beside him," he said once, standing in the doorway as I curled up on the cold tile. "I saved you, and you gave me your gratitude. But I didn't want your thanks, Mary. I wanted you." When I didn't respond, he starved me for 3 days. After that, I learned to nod, to agree, to keep my eyes down. I survived by vanishing inside myself. I stopped thinking in full sentences. I stopped counting days. I measured time by the sound of his footsteps, by the bowls of water left on the floor, by the bruises that never healed before new ones formed. I didn't cry anymore. The silence inside me was bigger than the pain. But then, something strange happened. One night, as he came in to taunt me with a story about someone he saw in town, a woman who reminded him of me, back when I was beautiful, he coughed. Hard. Then again, blood on his sleeve. He cursed, left the room, and slammed the door. 2 weeks later, I heard the word, cancer, stage 3, too late, too far, too much. I didn't feel hope. I didn't feel anything. He stopped locking the door eventually. Couldn't climb the stairs anymore. His body betrayed him the same way his love had betrayed me. I'd walk past his bedroom, slow, quiet, and hear him groaning, sometimes crying, other times cursing at God. I never went in. I didn't need revenge. Time was doing the work for me. The day he collapsed, I stood over him. He looked up at me, eyes sunken, skin gray. He tried to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe one last attempt to twist the knife. But I didn't speak. I just stared. And then I turned and walked away. I went to the room he once locked me in, opened it, sat on the floor and waited for morning. Just to know it came. Just to know I could feel time again. I was 35 years old. I had survived 2 husbands, 1 funeral, and a lifetime of cages. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But I was free. Not because I fought my way out. Not because I was brave. But because the monsters died first and I, somehow, was still breathing. That's not a happy ending. It's not a love story. It's just the truth.